Today, I'll show you how to remove anything from a photo in Photoshop. Stick around to the end because I'll share my clean plate trick, which most people skip, and that's exactly why their edges look off. I'm Jesus Ramirez, let's get started. In this image, we have a lot of distractions, the orange cones in the background, and the woman walking down the steps. To start, I'll click on the new layer icon to create a new layer. This is where we'll place all of our adjustments and we can always go back to the original. Then from the toolbar, enable the remove tool. Unless I'm retouching skin, most of the time I will use the remove tool or generator fill to remove distracting objects from my photos. Before you start, make sure that you have sample all layers checked so that we can work on this blank layer. Then make sure to uncheck remove after each stroke. That way the removal process is not applied when you release the mouse button. Then, under mode, I like to work with auto, so Photoshop chooses whether or not to use generative AI. The biggest reason why you don't always want to use generative AI is because it takes time to generate. Sometimes you can process the information on your device and the results are fantastic and you only wait a second or two. Let's start by removing the distracting cones. I'm just going to click and drag around this cone and loop, come back to where I started and release. Photoshop will fill that in. Since I uncheck remove after each stroke, I have to apply the change. To apply it, you can click on this check mark, or better yet, use the keyboard shortcut, which is Enter. And Photoshop instantly removes the cone from the image. Next, I'll loop around these two cones to select them, and I'll press Enter to remove them. It left a little piece behind, but that's okay. All I'm gonna do is circle around this piece, fill it in, and remove it. All that content was generated on this blank layer and we can always go back to the original. Next, let's work on this person and I'm gonna do exactly the same thing. I'm just gonna loop around her. You don't have to be very precise, but try to keep as much of the original background as possible. When I come back to where I started, Photoshop will fill that in. And again, I'll press Enter to remove her from the background. This time, Photoshop is using generative AI. We can tell that it is because this window comes up and the change doesn't happen instantly. And the result is just incredible. It was also placed on this layer. And you can use this technique for anything. For example, you could remove her purse. And in some cases, you may need to separate the job into two parts to get better control of the results. Start by painting over the straps. If you need to, tap on the bracket keys to adjust the brush size. They're the keys next to the letter P in North American keyboards. Once you paint over the straps, you can press Enter to apply the change. And notice how quickly this works. This is because Photoshop used device processing and it didn't send anything to the cloud. Now we can work on the rest of the purse, loop around it. Once it's all filled in, apply the change. And again, it happened instantly. But it gave us a little imperfection here that we can easily fix just by painting over it and applying the change. And that looks pretty good. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. Let's now try to remove the sunglasses from her head. I'll enable the remove tool and I'll paint around the sunglasses. I'll tap Enter to remove. And in this case, Photoshop doesn't do that good of a job. This is where the limitation of the remove tool starts to show. If you're dealing with intricate detail, generator fill is often the better choice. I'll undo those changes and let me show you how generator fill works. Go into the selection brush tool and do the same thing. Just loop around the glasses and come back to where you started so that Photoshop fills it all in. Then go into generative fill, leave the prompt blank, and hit generate. No need to type anything in. And now you can cycle through the variations to see which is the best result. In this case, I like the second one the best, and I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. When you get to this point, you can hold Shift and click on the bottom layer and press Ctrl G to put it all into a group. I'll click on the eye icon so you can see the original image, and I'll click on it again so you can see the edited version. As you've seen, removing simple objects in Photoshop is incredibly easy nowadays. But now, let me show you the advanced technique I rely on in real client projects. Perfect for removing complex distractions like this car behind the subject. Our first step is to remove her from the image. I know this is counterintuitive because we're trying to get rid of the car. But if we actually remove her from the image and generate a clean plate, we're going to get much more flexibility later on to create better edges. Let me show you how that works. To start, I'm going to click on the Select Subject button, which will make a selection out of her entire body. we want to expand the selection so that it's a few pixels away from the edges. And let me show you an advanced trick that I think you're gonna like. If you press the Q key on the keyboard, you'll enter the quick mask mode, which will enable you to go into Filter, Other, and you can choose maximum to expand the selection or minimum to contract it. In this case, we want to expand it, so I'll choose maximum. Then, from the preserve dropdown, make sure you select roundness, and you can drag the radius slider to the right to expand the selection further. This allows you to visualize how you expand the selection. In this case, about 4 pixels works great. All you need is a small gap between the edge of the selection and her body. Next, I'll enable the brush tool by pressing the B key on the keyboard. Then with white as my foreground color, I'm just going to paint along the edges like so. I want to make sure that I include all those flyaway hairs. I don't want to leave any of them out. Then press the Q key to exit the quick mask mode and see your selection. Next, I'm going to click on Generator Fill, leave the prompt blank, and click Generate. This will create a generation that will remove her from the image. Again, counterintuitive, but this is the best way to go. It doesn't really matter which variation you select. This is all going to be in the background, so any one of these should work just fine. I'm going to select this background layer and press Ctrl J to duplicate the layer and Ctrl right bracket key to jump it up the layer stack. Then disable the top layer, enable the Generator Fill layer, and from the toolbar, choose the Selection Brush tool. You can then loop around the car to make a selection. You don't have to be very precise, but try to get as much of the car without selecting too much of the background. Once I come back to where I started, I'll release and Photoshop will fill in that selection. I'll click on Generator Fill one more time, leave the prompt blank, and hit Generate. Photoshop will now remove the car from the image, giving me my empty background plate, which is exactly what I want. Then you can cycle through your variations to see which one works best. If you don't like any of them, you can always click on the Generate button one more time to get 3 additional variations, but in this case, I think I can make this first one work. Next, make sure the layer you just generated is active, hold Shift and click on the background. Then press Ctrl E to merge them all into one layer. And this is my clean background plate. Now my background copy is my foreground. And I'll rename it so you understand what these layers are doing. I'll enable the layer, and of course this is the original image and it's now time to remove the car. To do so, create a layer mask by clicking on the new layer mask icon. Here it is. Then enable the brush tool and make sure black is your foreground color. I'll increase my brush size by tapping on the right bracket key. Now you can simply paint with black on that mask to hide the car. But if I paint over her body, I will hide her. We don't want that, of course. So what I'll do is click on the foreground's layer thumbnail. Then I can select her body by simply clicking on Select Subject from the taskbar. Next, click on this icon to invert the selection so we select everything but her body. You can tell the selection is affecting the background because we can see the marching ants along the edges of the canvas. Now you can enable the layer mask once again and paint with black over the car and you will not affect her body. It just looks so magical. And here's the trick. Hold Alt, then click on the layer mask thumbnail to see the layer mask. The black areas are hiding the pixels on this layer, so make sure that there are no white areas over the car. By the way, if you're struggling with masking, I've got a course just for you. It's called Selections and Masking Mastery, and it walks you through every technique from essential tools to the pro workflows I use on real client projects. The link is in the description and in the pinned comments. And once you've made everything black over the car, you can hold Alt and click on the layer mask thumbnail to bring back the regular view. Then deactivate the selection by clicking on Deselect, and this looks just incredible. Now, all you have to do is fix the small imperfections. And this is why we created a clean plate, so that we can fix the edges. Enable the brush tool, reduce your brush size by tapping on the left bracket key, and then paint on these edges to hide them. Here's another trick. Click once, hold Shift, and click again, and Photoshop will create a straight line between those 2 points. And I'll keep using that same technique to fix the imperfections. And you don't have to analyze the entire image, just look at the areas where her body was over the car. And this looks pretty good. And if you made it this far, subscribe and click the notification bell so that you don't miss any new Photoshop tutorials.